Tonight, an Inca messenger must receive a state message with no alphabet, glyphs, or page, then carry its number and meaning intact. The incoming runner is out of breath, an inconvenient condition for precision and the usual condition for a relay. If these evenings honestly help, please like or subscribe and share your location and local time. Let the room dim and settle comfortably. You are beside a Chaskiwasi on the high Zauxa Pachacamac road in the late 15th century. A shell trumpet sounds. Your hand is open for the cord bundle. The station keeper takes the incoming package only long enough to confirm its wrapping, then returns it to the exchange. The man coming toward you is a Chaski, an official runner, and so are you. No surviving record gives us his name or the exact words exchanged on this afternoon. We will follow a carefully bounded composite, built from road remains, museum collections, indigenous and scholarly accounts, and early colonial descriptions used with caution. The road section is real. Stone steps still climb near Pariacaca, on the route that linked the highland center of Zauxa with Pachacamac on the coast. The relay procedure is reconstructed rather than witnessed. One spelling also needs settling. The public title says Inca because that is familiar in English. Here, after this moment, we will use Inca, a spelling closer to Quechua scholarly practice. The runner reaches the station doorway and lifts the bundle. That boundary between known evidence and plausible movement will remain visible whenever the scene supplies what no document preserves. He does not begin with a speech. First he places a small wrapped kipu in your palm, then a compact package against your forearm. Only when both are secure does he give the spoken part. Chaskis carried verbal messages, knotted cord records, and small objects through a relay system. The phrase without writing needs equal care. The Inca state had no known alphabetic or glyphic writing system, comparable to those familiar to many viewers. It did not leave information floating loose in memory. Quipu's recorded data through chords, colors, structure, and knots. Trained people interpreted them, while runners moved both the records and the words that gave them context. The distinction is practical before it is scholarly, because a state cannot count stores or direct labor with an absence. So the runner arrives carrying two kinds of certainty at once, and neither is expected to do the other's work. You will hold both before this stage is finished. The words carry the purpose, and the chords carry the amounts. Keeping them together is your job for the next stretch of road. The incoming runner speaks in short units. A storehouse account has been checked. A road work party farther west is due a measured allotment. The quipu carries the count, while the oral message identifies the immediate purpose and the expected destination. This particular errand is plausible staging, not a documented individual dispatch. It lets us keep every moving part in view without pretending that one surviving cord can be tied to one named afternoon. You repeat the message back. The runner listens for the order of its parts, not merely the general sense. A relay is not helped by a beautiful paraphrase. The next person needs the same task, the same place, and the same relationship between spoken words and knotted record. His reply is brief, because accuracy is easier to test when the message keeps the shape in which it was taught. The outgoing runner listens with his whole posture, holding still so that fatigue in one man does not become uncertainty in another. What survives in later descriptions of these handoffs is the repetition rather than the speed, and standing here you can see why. The fastest possible transfer would be worthless if it arrived slightly wrong. He corrects one phrase. The allotment is for the workers assigned to the crossing, not for the station beside it. The distinction would be uninteresting until sacks begin arriving at the wrong doorway. You say the sentence again, slower. His eyes move from your face to the quipu and back. The chords do not replace this oral clarification, and the oral clarification does not replace the chords. Together, they divide the burden. One medium holds structured quantities. Another carries names, intentions, urgency, and whatever cannot now be recovered from the surviving knots alone. A third element, the relay itself, limits how far any one runner must go. The system works because no single person is required to be road record. The correction fixes the purpose before distance can enlarge the mistake, and both men accept it as part of skilled work. Neither of you treats the correction as a failure. It is the step that makes the rest of the chain trustworthy, and it costs a few seconds against a stage that will take far longer. The Chaskiwasi is small, set close to the root. Sources disagree about a universal spacing. One Smithsonian presentation gives an approximate interval of 10 to 15 kilometers. Peruvian archaeological guidance describes some smaller shelters only a few kilometers apart. Terrain, route, period, and the kind of station all matter, so there is no honest reason to turn one interval into a law for the whole Andes. Your stage today is the distance this local chain has assigned. You know its rise, its exposed shoulder, and the last steep steps before the next shelter. The incoming runner knows another section. He has delivered the message into the only pair of hands that should now be carrying it, and his breathing begins to settle. On another slope, the interval might be shorter, longer, or organized around a different kind of shelter and road demand. The spacing often described falls somewhere near 10 to 15 kilometers, though that figure is a convenient average rather than a rule the mountains agreed to follow. You tuck the wrapped quipu inside a carrying fold, where it will not swing. The small package sits against your ribs. Before leaving, you touch both in sequence, an ordinary check that needs no ceremony. Cord, package, message. The runner waiting at the far station cannot receive two and be asked to imagine the third. Outside, the road angles upward across pale grass. A second chasqui stands ready near the doorway behind you, in case another signal comes from the opposite direction. He glances toward the path as though personal impatience might shorten it. The mountain remains unmoved by this administrative proposal. You step onto the road and begin at a pace meant to survive the climb. The waiting runner behind you has his own stage, and his stillness is simply another form of readiness. Behind the station wall, the relieved runner sits down, but the chain has already transferred its urgency into your moving feet. He will rest until another note reaches him from the far side, which is its own kind of employment, waiting well, in the right place, for something nobody can schedule. The first 100 paces are not dramatic. That is their value. Your feet know where the packed surface stays even, and where a stone edge has loosened. The Kapaknan was not one identical pavement laid from end to end. It was a connected system adapted to deserts, valleys, steep slopes, wetlands, and high grasslands, often incorporating older Andean routes. Here the builders used stone, earth, retaining walls, and stairs suited to the hillside. The road makes movement possible, but it does not make the mountain level. You shorten your stride on the first rise. The oral message runs quietly through your mind in the same order as before, while the quipu rests against the rhythm of your breathing. Every turn of the route reduces the unknown ahead to a surface already learned through repeated passage. You were taught this stage before you were trusted with it, and the teaching was mostly walking. A route learned by foot answers questions that no description of it could anticipate. Running at altitude is not a contest with the air. It is an agreement made one breath at a time. You keep the pace below the point where the message would break into fragments. The Chasqui system depended on trained runners and divided stages, not on one astonishing body crossing the empire without pause. Early accounts praise speed and give striking figures, but those numbers passed through colonial observers and later retellings. They are evidence of a reputation for rapid communication, not a stopwatch record for every route. On this ascent, the useful fact is simpler. A fresh runner takes one section, hands the load to another fresh runner, and the chain continues after his own legs stop. Your task is to preserve the handoff, not become a legend. You save the strongest breath for the last rise, where speed without speech would be an impressive but useless arrival. The air here gives back less than it does in the valleys, and everyone who works this road has arranged their effort around that fact rather than against it. The path narrows beside a retaining wall. Below it, the slope drops toward a stream too small to be heard from here. You place each foot where the surface is firm and let one hand hover near the wall without leaning on it. The road's engineering is now part of the message system. If the wall fails, the rudder slows. If drainage clogs, water eats the path. If steps loosen, every later handoff arrives less cleanly. Communication is therefore carried by far more people than the messenger whose figure appears in a drawing. Surveyors, elders, local work groups, station keepers, storehouse workers, and quipu specialists all stand invisibly inside this one run. You clear the narrow stretch and let your arm drop again. Each supporting task changes the odds that the message will remain ordinary, which is exactly what a working system requires. A message can cross a mountain only when those unseen contributions arrive before the runner and remain after he has passed. The wall beside you was built by people meeting an obligation to labor, part of the reciprocal arrangements that organized Andean work, and it will outlast every message it carries. A cloud crosses the sun, and the temperature. You pull the edge of your garment closer without breaking pace. We cannot know the exact weather on this composite run, but exposed highland routes brought practical changes of wind, cold, glare, and rain. None of them needs to become a disaster to matter. Damp fingers can fumble a knot bundle. A gust can shift a small package. Cold can tighten the shoulders until breathing becomes wasteful. You check the bundle once more and keep the spoken sentence in its set order. The message has no interest in whether the afternoon feels grand. It only requires that you arrive able to say it clearly. The cloud passes, leaving the road brighter, but your pace stays measured because weather is only one demand among several. Cold arrives faster than tiredness at this height, and a runner who lets it settle into his hands will fumble the very transfer he ran to protect. At a bend, the road becomes a flight of stone steps. Remains near the Pariacaca route show precisely this kind of adaptation to steep terrain. You do not charge them. The front of the foot lands, the body rises, and the next breath follows. The package presses once against your side, reminding you to tighten the fold. A runner who knows the route can spend attention on the message because the feet already understand the next surface. This is one reason local knowledge matters. An instruction issued far away may name the destination, but it cannot tell you which third step rocks after rain. The road is official. The knowledge that makes it passable is exact, local, and learned by use. At the top, you do not look back for long. The next surface already asks for the attention you can spare. Stairs, drains, paving, and retaining walls all appear along these routes, chosen against the ground each one had to cross, rather than repeated from a single approved plan. The oral message returns in a practice sequence: source, verified account, intended workers, receiving place, expected action. We do not possess an Inca manual describing a universal memorization method for chasquis. Colonial reports and modern educational reconstructions describe messages repeated and handed onward, and repetition is the cautious center of what can be said. You avoid adding explanation. Each extra phrase is another object to carry, and unlike the package, it cannot be tied shut. The quipu gives the relay a stable material companion. Its knots do not depend on your breath, yet their meaning still depends on trained interpretation and shared context. Record and recital travel together up the steps. Memory here is disciplined by sequence, repetition, and the presence of an object whose arrangement can be checked later. The repeated units also give the receiving runner places to notice a missing part before the entire sentence has moved onward. You have never been asked to improve the phrasing. Improvement is exactly the danger, because a better sentence is a different sentence by the time it has crossed 4 more stages. The sequence is fixed for the same reason: source, verified account, intended workers, receiving place, timing. A fixed order makes a missing piece obvious instead of merely unfamiliar. Near the top, the road levels for several dozen paces. You use them to recover without stopping. The quipu under the cloth is made of a primary cord with hanging cords attached, though you do not unfold it here. Knots placed along those cords can represent decimal values. Other choices, including color, fiber, twist, attachment, grouping, and spacing, may carry categories or additional distinctions. The many surviving quipus display clear numerical organization, and historical sources associate specialists with census, labor, goods, and other state records. The bundle beside your ribs contains structured information, not a lucky charm and not a decorative memory aid. The wrapped cords touch your side without revealing themselves, carrying an order that remains stable while the landscape changes. Cords like these were commonly cotton, with camelid fiber turning up as well, and they could be folded into a bundle small enough to run with. The next descent begins with loose gravel at its edge. You shorten the stride again. Far ahead, still hidden by a shoulder of land, another chasqui may already be listening for the trumpet. The shell instrument is documented in later indigenous colonial imagery and museum teaching materials as part of the runner's equipment. It gives the waiting person time to come out and prepare. This is considerate, though it also ensures that no one can claim to have been surprised by the arrival of a man who has been audibly approaching for some time. You leave the trumpet untouched for now. A signal too early would only produce a patient audience at an empty bend. The waiting Chasqui will hear the note as an instruction to prepare his hands, his breath, and his own remembered route. The shell trumpet carries further than a voice and asks for nothing in return, which makes it the most reliable colleague on the route. The road opens across a high shelf. Its width here allows two people to pass without either stepping onto the slope. UNESCO's description of the Kapak Nan emphasizes not a single road, but a vast network, more than 30,000 kilometers at its fullest extent, linking environments from high mountains to coast, forest, valley, and desert. That scale belongs in the background, not as a boast shouted over your shoulder. Your world is the next station, yet the shelf beneath your feet is joined to branches, centers, storehouses, and crossings far beyond sight. A local stage becomes useful because it fits into the larger pattern. The message can travel farther than any runner precisely because each runner accepts a smaller horizon. Scale becomes manageable when every station belongs to a known neighboring station rather than to the whole horizon at once. No runner needs to picture every branch, only the neighboring link, whose readiness turns a local path into a network. At its widest, the system is described in tens of thousands of kilometers, but nobody ran that number. You run the part of it that ends where somebody is standing. You pass a pair of travelers moving in the opposite direction, each leading a laden llama. The state road served many forms of authorized movement, though access and use varied by place and purpose. You give the inner edge to the animals and keep the package away from their loads. One llama turns its head with the calm curiosity of an inspector who has not requested the paperwork. Then the path is clear again. The spoken message has survived the interruption because you never stopped holding its sequence. Distraction is not a dramatic enemy. It is a passing animal, a loose sandal edge, a sudden gust, or the ordinary wish to think about anything except the exact sentence that must be repeated. The llama resumes its walk, having completed an inspection for which no official appointment appears to have been required. The travelers move on toward whatever their own permission covers. Loaded animals, workers, and officials all use these roads, and the runner is only the fastest thing on them. The next landmark is a shallow channel cut to move water away from the road. It is dry now. You cross it in one step. Ditches and drains appear among the many engineering forms documented along the road system, along with stairs, retaining walls, paving, and bridges. Their designs vary with regional conditions. A drainage channel is not merely a detail beside the route. It is a decision about future movement, made before the next storm arrives. The Chasqui who crosses it notices only that the surface remains intact. Good infrastructure often disappears into an uneventful footfall. Your message gains several seconds because someone else once understood where water would choose to go. That quiet channel protects future movement by giving water another route, a small choice with consequences beyond the bend. Drainage is the least admired form of engineering, and among the most necessary, because water left to its own preferences will unmake a road faster than any traffic. Your breathing has found its middle rhythm. Now you test the words without speaking aloud. The receiving workers are not being told simply that supplies exist. They are being told that an account has been checked and that a measured issue should proceed. The Kipu may preserve quantities and categories, while the oral report connects those figures to a current decision. This division is an inference consistent with the known pairing of kippahs and verbal messages, not a translated chord in a museum case. It shows why calling the system a game of telephone would be misleading. The relay is trained, materially supported, and checked at handoffs. Human memory remains essential, but it is not abandoned to casual retelling. You keep the purpose attached to the count, because numbers alone cannot tell a receiving worker what should happen next. The chords can hold the quantity indefinitely and without argument. What they cannot hold is the reason. Lose the words and the chords become a quantity with no instruction attached. Lose the chords and the words become a claim that nobody can check. A small stone shelter comes into view on a distant rise. It is not yours. It belongs to another roadside function, perhaps a refuge or control point, and the route contains many kinds of associated structures. You keep to the main line. Chasqui oases were only one part of a wider administrative landscape that included tampas for lodging and provisioning, kolkas for storage, larger centers, and local settlements. The boundaries between labels can be difficult to recover from ruins alone. Archaeologists read size, plan, location, and association, while early documents provide names filtered through colonial needs. For the runner, the distinction is practical. The next relay shelter must contain the next runner, not merely a very respectable wall. Stone walls can survive while labels disappear. So modern names for roadside structures must be used with restraint. The walls may be quiet now, yet their placement once organized movement by giving different tasks their own dependable locations. Stations for runners, lodging for authorized travelers, and storehouses for supplies were not the same thing, and the road worked because they were kept distinct. The package shifts. You catch it against your ribs before it can slide lower and stop for the length of one breath to retie the fold. Nothing has fallen, but the pause costs time. This is the sort of friction a relay system is designed to absorb. Another runner will take over before your small discomfort becomes the chain's permanent condition. You test the kipu bundle with 2 fingers. It is dry. You say the message once under your breath, exactly as received. The mountains offer no applause, which is useful because applause would make the next line harder to hear. You resume, now with the package sitting higher and the cord bundle held close. The repaired fold now holds both objects close enough that your arms can return to the work of balance. You lose perhaps 20 paces to the adjustment and say an unknown number later, which is the ordinary arithmetic of carrying things a long way. The path rises toward a notch. Beyond it lies the final section to the station. Your legs are warm and your mouth dry. No source can tell us whether a runner on this exact route carried water for this exact stage, so we do not invent a convenient vessel at his belt. Stations and larger facilities could provide support, while short relay distances limited exposure. What matters here is the consequence of the climb. Breath must be recovered before speech. A runner who reaches the doorway first, but delivers the message as a collection of gasps, has misunderstood the useful meaning of speed. You ease the pace before the crest, preserving enough air for the trumpet and the handoff. The station ahead will provide the pause that the road withholds, but only after the message has been made complete again. You ration the climb the way you ration everything else on this stage, spending what the notch requires, and keeping the rest for the words. Arriving unable to speak would be much the same as not arriving. The trumpet, the handoff, and the repetition all need air you have to plan for. At the notch, wind presses through from the other side. The western slope falls away in long folds. Somewhere below the horizon, the route continues toward lower country, and eventually the coast. You do not need to picture all of it. The next strunger will know the next stage, and another will know the one after that. Administrative reach is built from this refusal to make one person responsible for the whole distance. You check the sequence again, the verified count, the intended work party, the receiving place, the action requested. The package and kipu remain secure. The station roof is not yet visible, but you know where the road bends before it. Below the notch, the next runger's route is folded into land you have walked, but are not responsible to carry today. Responsibility ends cleanly here, and that clean ending is part of the design. A chain of short, well-known stages fails more gently than one long heroic run. The bend arrives beside another run of fitted steps. Their edges have been worn by feet, though not all wear can be assigned neatly to one century. The Kapaknan existed before, during, and after Inca rule, and many communities have continued to use and care for its roots. That long life complicates simple pictures of an untouched imperial road. It also makes the human point clearer. A road is not merely constructed. It is walked, repaired, altered, remembered, and sometimes abandoned or revived. Your composite runner belongs to one late 15th century moment within that longer history. He climbs the steps because people before him made a passage and people near him keep it open. Continued use preserves some paths and changes others, leaving a layered road rather than a single frozen imperial surface. Your feet read the next worn edge without naming it, another learned pattern supporting the message carried in conscious memory. Some of these surfaces were old before the empire reached them and were taken into the network rather than replaced. A practical inheritance rather than a monument. Now the station appears low against the slope. A figure stands outside. He has heard nothing yet, but he is looking east, perhaps because your stage has taken close to its expected time. Relay timing could be monitored by experience rather than by a modern clock. The chain depends on readiness and familiarity with ordinary intervals. You lift the shell trumpet and give the agreed signal. The note travels ahead over the grass. The waiting Chasqui steps onto the road. His posture changes at once from patience to preparation, and you are reminded that waiting can be strenuous when the only task is not to miss the person who will release you from it. At last, the trumpet gives your approach a shape the station can answer before your face becomes clear. The note travels ahead of you and does the introducing, so that the last stretch of running belongs entirely to your legs, and not at all to your explanation. You slow before the final incline. The next runger comes down several paces to meet you, reducing the distance without confusing the handoff point. Whether this exact courtesy was customary is unknowable, so it remains plausible staging. The essential structure is firm. Relay runners exchanged messages and goods at stations. Your right hand goes to the package. Your left finds the wrapped kipu. The oral message waits behind your teeth. 3 things arrive together, and 3 must leave together. The waiting runner does not reach early. A clean transfer is easier when each object has one owner at a time. The 2 of you close the final paces together, turning separate stretches of road into one connected transfer. He has been listening for the trumpet since it sounded, and his hands are already free. Readiness on his side is what turns your arrival into a handoff, rather than a delay. First, the package moves. He places it against his body and secures it. Next, the kipu passes from your palm to his, still wrapped. He tests its time. The sentence comes in the same units you received, with a small pause between source, account, workers, place, and action. The next runner watches your mouth, then lowers his eyes briefly toward the bundle. He is not reading the knots here. He is joining the spoken instruction to the material record that will be interpreted by the proper specialist. When you finish, he begins the message back to you. The objects settle against his body, and the message follows them as the third part of the same delivery. Package, record, and words move in that order every time, and the order itself is a kind of checking. Nothing counts as transferred until all 3 have arrived. His first repetition changes the receiving place into the name of the nearby station. You stop him with one raised finger. The allotment belongs to the work party at the crossing, not to this shelter. He nods and begins again from the start. There is no embarrassment in the correction. The handoff exists partly to expose an error, while both runners are present. A chain that values speed but refuses verification would be quick only until the first confusion. The second repetition is exact. You touch the package, then the kipu, and name them in the order of transfer. He answers with the task. The message has crossed your stage without losing its parts. The second version restores the intended workers, and the error disappears before it gains another pair of running feet. This is the whole reason the repetition exists. A mistake caught at the station costs 1 sentence, and the same mistake caught 4 stages later costs the delivery. For a moment, both of you stand still. This is the earned answer hiding inside the title. The Inca state did not move information by pretending that speech was writing, or that knots were a secret alphabet already translated. It used a coordinated system. Kippas held structured records, especially quantities and administrative relationships. Kipakamayuks made and interpreted them. Chaskis memorized and relayed spoken messages, carrying kippas and small objects between prepared stations. The Kapak Nan divided distance into known stages, while workers maintained the surfaces, bridges, shelters, and stores that made movement possible. Information traveled through people, fibers, roads, and repeated checks. No one component is enough by itself. Reliability emerges from their overlap and from the chances to compare one with another. The overlap also makes correction possible, because a mismatch between word, record, object, or destination can be noticed before action follows. Redundancy looks wasteful until something goes wrong. Here it is, the cheapest part of the system, and the part that makes the rest of it worth trusting. Without writing, then, does not mean without records, training, or design. It means without a known alphabetic or glyphic script comparable to a page of words. The distinction matters because the familiar categories can otherwise make a sophisticated system seem empty. A chord can preserve number and arrangement without looking like a sentence. A spoken message can carry purpose without being casual. A relay can be exact without asking one runner to remember a journey of hundreds of kilometers. The system's intelligence lies not in one miraculous object, but in the way several ordinary human tasks fit together. Your stage is complete because the next runner now holds the same linked burden you received. That answer is less dramatic than a lost secret, but it is more faithful to the work visible in roads, chords, and hands. Nothing in this arrangement was casual. Trained runners, maintained roads, specialist record keepers, and a fixed order of handoff together did what an alphabet does elsewhere. The absence of writing is not an absence of administration. It is a different arrangement of the same requirements, built from chord, memory, road, and trained people. One uncertainty remains open rather than being turned into a tidy conclusion. Many kippahs clearly encode numerical and administrative information. Colonial accounts also describe broader uses, and some researchers investigate whether chord features could carry names, histories, or other non-numerical content. Rare matches between surviving kippahs and colonial records suggest that more than bare totals may sometimes have been represented. Yet the system has not been fully deciphered, and no responsible account can translate every color, twist, and knot into prose. The debate is active because the evidence is substantial and incomplete. Your runner does not need that future debate resolves. He needs the right specialist to read this particular account in its living context. Active research can sharpen the range of possibilities, while still leaving many individual kippahs without a secure reading. It is honest to say that the system worked, and also that we cannot read most of what it produced. Both statements rest on the same evidence. That is an uncomfortable pair of sentences to hold together, and holding them is the honest position. The system is well attested. Most individual readings are not recoverable. The next Chasqui tightens the carrying fold. He repeats the message one final time, no longer for correction, but to set its rhythm before the climb. Then he turns west. Within a few paces, his feet settle into the road's pattern, and the package stops shifting. The kippah has left your hands. The oral words have left your responsibility. Your own breathing slows as the distance between you grows. Nothing spectacular marks the transfer. That quietness is the system working. A message has crossed one difficult stage because the runner knew his route. The record stayed intact. The speech was checked, and another trained person was waiting. His departure carries the answer onward in action, making the system easier to understand than any list of its parts. He will reach his own station, repeat what he was told, and hand across the same three things. The design does not change because the runner does. You return to the low station wall and sit where the wind is weaker. The incoming runner from the east has already loosened his sandals and is checking a rubbed strap. Neither of you knows the message's final arrival from personal sight. Trust here is not blind faith in strangers. It is confidence built from repeated roles, shared procedures, and material signs that can be checked. The next station will repeat what you have done. A later specialist will compare chord and count. The receiving official will act, delay, or ask for correction. The chain contains several chances to notice trouble before a mistaken allotment becomes a larger problem. The station gives each runner a place to become tired without making fatigue the permanent condition of the message. Your breathing slows. The message is now somebody else's care, moving away from you at a pace you no longer set. From the doorway, the road looks almost empty again. Its stones do not advertise the words that just crossed them. The title story is complete, but the road itself has not finished its work. A relay station can be ready only if the approach remains passable. A package can arrive only if a bridge holds. A quipu can be useful only if stores, workers, and officials can connect its counts to real goods. Farther along this same imagined chain, an adult responsible for a crossing has spent the morning testing rope and stones. The messenger has run his stage. Now the camera stays with the people who make the next stage possible. Before the road can carry another bundle, someone must inspect the stone, fiber, drainage, shelter, and stores beneath its speed. Speed is the visible surface of a much wider arrangement of maintenance, storage, training, checking, and local knowledge. You will sleep here tonight and run the same stage tomorrow, and the road will have been kept open in the meantime by people you will never be introduced to. At a grass rope bridge farther west, a worker presses his heel against the first floor cable and watches it answer. The bridge has carried runners before, but every crossing begins with the same practical question. Is today's passage ready for today's wait? Our worker is another bounded composite. His setting draws on Inca bridge evidence and on the living annual renewal of Coashuachaca by Kiowa communities, whose knowledge must not be treated as a museum survival without present odors. The exact bridge on our message route is not identified. His ordinary goal is modest. Inspect the crossing, tighten what can be tightened, and keep the road open long enough for the next messenger and the supplies named in the account. The river below is loud enough to discourage casual conversation, so each worker reads the others through gestures and practiced timing. The worker waits for the cable's answer, treating its slight movement as information rather than as either reassurance or alarm. A cable that has gone completely quiet under a heel is not necessarily a good cable. It may only mean the tension has moved somewhere he has not yet put his hand. He walks to the stone anchorage and lays both hands on a main cable. Grass has become cord, cord has become rope, and rope has become a structural member thick enough to carry a walkway across moving water. The material is light in his fingers only at the first stage. Once many strands are twisted and braided together, persuasion requires a group. A wet bundle of fiber beside the wall has chosen the shape of a sulking animal and is resisting improvement. Two workers roll it under their palms until the strands align. The bridge keeper checks for uneven tension, because one loose section turns every careful step into an argument with the floor. Fiber that looks unimpressive alone becomes dependable only after preparation, combination, and tension distribute the load across many strands. Grass becomes cord, cord becomes rope, and rope becomes cable, and at no point in that sequence does any single strand become strong. The strength is entirely in the arrangement. Road engineering across the Andes was regional rather than uniform. Builders used the materials and forms suited to each landscape. Stone steps on steep slopes, retaining walls along cuts, raised or cleared surfaces, drainage works, and different kinds of crossings. Some rivers could be passed by stone structures or smaller local solutions. Deep gorges demanded suspension bridges made from plant fiber. The Kapaknan's coherence did not depend on forcing every valley to look alike. It depended on connecting routes and facilities through workable local designs. The man at the anchorage knows this bridge's stone, grass, wind, and seasonal wear. An official plan may require passage, but only local hands can tell whether the left cable has begun to slacken. His judgment is specific to this crossing, learned through maintenance rather than borrowed from a generalized picture of an Inca road. Another gorge a day's walk away will have its own habits, its own prevailing wind, and its own list of places that fail first. None of that transfers. The worker's service belongs to the larger system of labor obligations, often called mita in scholarship. Those obligations differed across regions and purposes, and their experience cannot be reduced to a cheerful community workday or a single picture of coercion. Inca administration drew labor from subject communities for roads, agriculture, military service, craft production, and other state projects. Local organization and reciprocal expectations shaped how tasks were assigned, while imperial demands remained demands. Here the worker's immediate concern is the crossing entrusted to his group. He calls for another turn on the rope. 3 adults lean together, gain a small measure of tension, and settle the cable back against the anchorage. The workers know who has brought each coil and which section of the approach will be their responsibility after the bridge check. Obligations of this kind organized a great deal of Andean labor, and the arrangement worked partly because the people meeting it would also be the people crossing the result. The smallest cords are made from prepared grass twisted by hand. Several cords combine into a rope, and ropes combine into the large cables. At Coxhuaca today, local Quechua communities renew the bridge annually using inherited expertise: coya grass, stone abutments, major floor cables, and handrail cables. That present practice demonstrates what skilled grass engineering can do. It does not prove that every Inca bridge followed one exact sequence or calendar. Our worker checks the principle that does travel safely across time. Strength comes from many prepared fibers, sharing strain. He bends a fresh cord until it holds its twist, then passes it to the next pair of hands. Letting expertise gives the old engineering present tense, while archaeology and historical accounts help establish its deeper continuity and variation. Communities still renew a grass bridge at Quechua each year, working in coordinated tasks that have to be learned from someone who already knows them. 4 communities take part, each with its own portion of the work, and the crossing is remade in a matter of days. Work moves along the bank in a chain, as disciplined as the chasqui relay. One person prepares fiber, another twists, others combine, stretch, carry, secure, and inspect. No single worker is secretly a bridge. The large cable exists because small tasks remain consistent through many hands. A stubborn strand catches beneath a heel and pulls loose from the coil. Its owner retrieves it with the patient expression of someone being corrected by grass. The humor ends in he retwists the loosened length, checks the join, and returns it to the group. Material knowledge includes knowing how to repair the small mistake before it becomes a weak place over the gorge. The repaired strand disappears back into the larger rope, where its importance is measured by what it helps the whole cable endure. Nobody will ever look at that particular strand again. It will simply be part of the reason the bridge holds, which is the most common form of successful work. At the abutment, the bridge master studies the main lines rather than the rushing water below. Massive stones hold the cable ends. Tension carries the load toward those anchors. The floor is supported by parallel main cables, while side ropes provide something for a traveler to hold. Exact bridge forms varied, and archaeological remains preserve stone anchors more readily than plant fiber. Colonial descriptions and living traditions help fill part of that gap, though each source has its own date and viewpoint. The worker steps onto the first pace of the deck, shifts his weight slowly, and watches how the woven surface settles between the lines. The deck's movement reaches the anchorage as tension, and the fixed stone returns that force through the braided lines. Stone abutments take the pull at both ends, and everything between them is plant fiber that was growing on a hillside within the last year or two. Floor cables carry the walking surface, and lighter lines rise beside them as handrails, so the crossing is held from below and steadied at the sides. He advances one step at a time. A suspension bridge moves because movement is part of its design, not evidence that it has forgotten its purpose. The deck dips slightly under his foot and rises after it. The crossing is careful, not theatrical. A person who knows the bridge does not prove confidence by ignoring it. Halfway out, he pauses to feel whether the two sides answer evenly. An overconfident traveler waiting on the bank suggests that the bridge looks perfectly sound. The worker invites him to save that opinion until he is the one standing in the middle. Confidence on this crossing means holding the rope and placing the foot well, not pretending that the gorge has become irrelevant. The bridge master marks the repaired binding in memory and assigns another inspection after the next period of hard weather. There is no register for this. The record is a man who has walked the deck often enough to know which sections ask for attention and which have earned a little trust. The answer comes through the soles of his feet. One section pulls more sharply to the right. He returns to the bank and points to a binding where the floor lattice meets a main line. The knot has not failed, but the connection needs adjustment. Two workers draw the section inward, while a third resets the tie. This is maintenance at human scale, not rebuilding an empire, only preventing a repeated sideways pull. Sources indicate that Inca bridge communities maintained crossings, and that major fiber bridges could require frequent replacement, often annually or every 2 years in later descriptions. Organic materials demanded renewal. The road remained continuous because its components were allowed to be temporary and cared for. The adjustment is small enough to finish now and important enough that postponing it would burden every later traveler. Fiber does not fail politely at a convenient hour. It gives way under the load it happens to be carrying, which is why the repair belongs to today. Once the binding is reset, a second worker crosses carrying no load. He keeps his pace even and calls back what he feels. The bridge master listens, then sends a small bundle across. The test adds weight gradually. None of these exact steps survives as a written Inca checklist, so they remain plausible craft staging. What is securely supported is the communal skill, the braided fiber technology, the stone anchoring, and the necessity of repeated maintenance. The bundle reaches the far side without shifting. The first worker watches the handrail cable and sees no new twist. He nods. passage is nearly ready, but the approaches still need inspection. After the test, the bridge master checks the ties once more, because a successful crossing is evidence to examine, not permission to stop noticing. One person walking across proves that one person can walk across. The cruise that as the beginning of the check rather than the end of it. A short stair climbs from the bridge to the road. 2 stones have collected grit along their inner edges. The worker uses a flat tool to clear the surface and pushes loose material away from the drainage side. On another landscape, road maintenance would look different. Here a few handfuls of grit can turn a runner's landing into a slide. He tests each cleared step with the ball of his foot. The work is ordinary enough to be missed by every traveler who benefits from it. That is a quiet measure of success. No one writes home to praise the stair that did not move. The chasqui simply keeps his message and his balance. His tool leaves a clean edge beside the stone, and the next runner will meet traction rather than loose grit. A handful of gravel on a stair is a small thing until somebody arrives on it at speed with both arms occupied. Farther uphill, a retaining wall shows a narrow gap where runoff has carried soil away. The group cannot rebuild the whole section today, but they can keep water from enlarging it. They clear the ditch above and set smaller stones behind the face. Archaeological and heritage descriptions of the Kapaknan emphasize such varied elements. Walls, stairs, paving, drains, and roadside structures adapted to location. The worker's hands turn that broad description back into consequence. A blocked channel sends water under the road. Water removes support. A loosened surface slows people and pack animals. Clearing the ditch protects a message that has not yet reached this bend. The repaired gap will need watching after weather changes, but today's intervention prevents a minor weakness from becoming a broken approach. Water finds the gap first and then widens it patiently. Closing it now costs an hour, and closing it in a season would cost the crossing its approach. Near midday, one worker walks to the Tampu complex above the crossing. Tampas provided temporary lodging and provisions for authorized travelers, workers, officials, and other state traffic, though their size and plan varied widely. Some stood beside storehouses, others belonged to larger administrative centers. The word does not name one standard roadside inn. Here the worker checks whether the road crew's food issue has arrived. The keeper opens a storage room and shows him what remains. There is enough for the present shift, but not for the next group expected to renew more of the approach. This is why the message moving west matters. The keeper's count links the morning's engineering to the administrative network, giving a distant message a reason to matter here. The bridge crew's allotment is not a favor. It is a quantity somebody has recorded, and it will be released only when the record and the goods agree. That condition protects everyone. A crew that received goods on a spoken promise alone would have no way to show later what had actually been sent. Rows of kolkas could hold maize, potatoes, quinoa, clothing, tools, and other state supplies, depending on region and purpose. Their forms also varied, with round and rectangular buildings placed to exploit dry, cool conditions and airflow. The worker does not tour the architecture. He counts what the keeper sets out and compares it with the number expected for today's crew. A sack at the end of the row has settled sideways and refuses to resemble the others. 2 people lift it upright. Administrative order, like bridge work, is occasionally defeated by a bag that has developed its own interpretation of vertical, cool, dry storage and orderly grouping protect both the goods and the accuracy of the account attached to them. Storehouses were built round and rectangular in different places, sited to catch moving air and stay cool, because a store that spoils is a record that has quietly become false. The tampoo peeper marks the shortfall for the receiving specialist. The worker cannot authorize a larger issue by confidence alone. Goods in state storage were counted, assigned, and redistributed through administrative systems, in which Kippis played a central role. The missing allotment in our plausible chain therefore has a material shape. Food and cloth not yet released to a work party. The bridge can open today, but future maintenance depends on the account being reconciled. The worker returns outside and looks east along the road. If the relay is running to its usual rhythm, a trumpet should sound before the light reaches the canyon wall. A request can now travel with a verified shortage behind it, rather than with the bridge crew's understandable impatience alone. A shortage that has been counted travels differently from a shortage that has only been felt. One of them can be acted on at the other end of the road. A runner appears first as movement above the stair. Then the shell note arrives. The worker steps clear of the path and signals that the bridge is open. The chassis slows, checks the handrails, and begins the crossing. The deck moves under him, but the package stays close, and the cord bundle remains secured. Everyone on the bank watches the bridge rather than asking for news. The messenger's task is to reach the next station, not conduct a meeting in the middle of a gorge. He crosses with both hands available, regains the road, and accelerates only after the final stone step. The worker notes the runner's balanced pace, the practical sign that the bridge is carrying movement without demanding a correction. The crew reads the runner the way they read the cables, watching for hesitation in a place where hesitation would mean something needs their hands. The worker follows the runner with his eyes until the path bends. A message system has just used the crossing, and the crossing has justified the morning's labor. The result is not abstract connectivity. It is one adult carrying one bundle without having to climb into the canyon and out again. The group now walks the deck with a heavier test load. Ropes hold, bindings remain even, and the anchorage shows no movement. The bridge master records the needed future work through the local administrative chain. Maintenance is never finished forever. It is finished enough for the next consequence to proceed. Passage is the payoff. No ceremony, only a person reaching the opposite bank with every entrusted object still secure. The morning's work has produced nothing anyone would think to record. It has produced a crossing that behaved exactly as it did yesterday. On the far bank, another crew clears wind-blown grass from the road edge. Their methods are simpler than the bridge work, but belong to the same responsibility. The Kapuknan was sustained by communities along its routes, whose labor and knowledge adapted state needs to local terrain. Heritage authorities also stress that present-day communities remain custodians of many sections and associated traditions. That living relationship should not be folded into a sentence that treats the road as an abandoned imperial machine. Our historical worker sets one stone back into the stair. The modern descendants of road communities have their own histories, rights, and meanings, not merely evidence for his. That distinction keeps present communities visible as people, not as props used to make an imperial past seem complete. The knowledge that renews these cables belongs to the communities holding it now, and it is theirs to keep, to teach, and to change. The Tampu keeper returns with a small local kipu, used to organize the remaining stores. She does not open the messages. Instead, she checks her own record against the physical rows. The bridge worker names the size of the next shift and the day the heavier repair should begin. This exchange is plausible, while the use of kippas for inventories and labor administration is well supported. A count becomes a request only when people connect it to a task. The local record will meet the arriving state instruction farther along the chain, where a specialist can compare them. The keeper's local record turns tomorrow's labor need into a quantity that can be compared farther along the road. Small working kippas like this one were not archives. They were the ordinary paperwork of a place that had to know what it still had. Afternoon wind enters the gorge and the handrail ropes begin a low vibration. The workers gather unused fiber, cover what must remain dry, and secure the tools. One person crosses to the far anchorage for a final look. Another checks the cleared drain. The keeper closes the storage room. Their actions converge on the same small achievement. Passage remains possible, and the shortage has been reported through channels that can act on it. The road is not a line drawn across a map. It is repeated labor at thousands of particular points, each with its own stone, fiber, water, and human schedule. By evening, each secured object reflects a completed decision, and the crossing can meet the night without an open repair. Nothing is left half done at a bridge. An unfinished binding would spend the whole night being tested by wind that does not observe working hours. The bridge master places his foot on the first cable again. It answers evenly now. Today's goal is complete. The chassis has crossed. The weak binding has been reset. The approach is clear, and the next repair has a counted need attached to it. Above the canyon, the road continues toward the place where chords are made meaningful by trained hands. The worker cannot read the traveling kipu from here, and he does not need to. His part is passage. The next adult in the chain will sit with primary cord, pendants, colors, and knots, and ask whether the account in the bundle agrees with the stores it is meant to move. The bridge remains behind as the narrative follows the count toward the specialist, whose hands can connect cords to stores. The cables will be renewed again within a year or two, taken down and rebuilt from new grass by the same coordinated effort that raised them. Renewal at short intervals is not a sign of fragility. It is the maintenance that plant fiber requires, and the communities served by a bridge carried that responsibility. In a provincial administrative room, a Kipukamayuk lays the traveling bundle beside a local storehouse record. He is a specialist responsible for making, keeping, and interpreting kippas. Like the runners and bridge workers, he is a bounded composite rather than a named historical person. His immediate task is practical. Confirm that the requested allotment belongs to the right work group and that its quantity agrees with the account already held here. He loosens the outer tie but does not pull at the knots. The cords open across a woven cloth, a primary line with pendant cords hanging from it. What looked compact on the road becomes an ordered field of fiber under his hands. The cloth keeps the pendant ends visible, allowing comparison without asking the fibers to endure unnecessary handling. His fingertips move slowly because speed at the table would risk disturbing the very structure he has been trained to interpret. The bundle has been folded and carried for a day and a night. Part of his work is simply letting it return to the shape in which it can be read. Some cords are cotton. Others in surviving kippas were made from camelid fiber, including longa or alpaca. Material choice varied, and a single object can contain more than one kind of cord or color. The specialist separates two pendant groups with his fingers and prevents them from tangling. The kippu is portable, but portability does not mean it enjoys being dropped into a heap. The bundle has survived the relay because the runners carried it closed. Now its structure must be visible without being disturbed. The specialist turns the primary cord so the attachments face the direction he expects, then places the local record beside it for comparison. Portability is a design advantage only because makers and readers also know how to preserve the arrangement during movement. Cotton takes a knot differently from camelid fiber, and a reader's hands learn both. The material is not decoration, it is part of how the record behaves. The typical kippu begins with a primary cord. Pendant cords hang from it, and subsidiary cords may hang from those. Some specimens also have top cords attached in the opposite direction. Knots can appear on several levels of this structure. Modern descriptions use terms that help catalog what survives, but the Inca specialist would have worked within a learned system embedded in language, administration, and practice. We cannot recover his private vocabulary by simply translating the museum labels backward. What we can follow is the action. He finds the beginning of the traveling record, traces the sequence of pendant groups, and identifies the cluster relevant to the requested supplies. His first task is orientation, since a structured record becomes harder to follow when it's beginning and attachments are misplaced. Pendant cords hang from that primary line. Subsidiaries hang from the pendants, and in some records a top cord gathers a total. Finding the start makes the rest available. Attachment, grouping, and spacing all sit inside that structure. A reader who begins in the wrong place can follow every cord correctly and still arrive at nonsense. The numerical organization is the best understood part. Knot position along a pendant cord can represent decimal places, units lying nearer one end, with tens, hundreds, and higher places arranged by position. Knot forms and counts distinguish values within that framework. The specialist does not count every knot as though all knots mean the same thing. He reads location, type, and grouping together. On the local kippu, one cord records a smaller quantity than its neighbor, even though it carries more visible turns. The difference is positional. A person familiar only with loose strings might choose the busier cord as the larger number and become confidently wrong, which is a durable human skill in any material. Place value allows a small set of knot forms to organize large quantities without making every unit a separate mark. Position carries the size of the number, so a knot near one end and the same knot near the other are not saying the same thing at all. Color also matters, though modern scholars cannot assign one universal dictionary to every hue. A brown cord might mark one category in one administrative context and something else in another. Patterned, mottled, segmented, or barber pole cords add further distinctions. The specialist knows the conventions used in his working network and the subject of the account before him. He places two similarly colored groups side by side. Their knots align in decimal order, but their attachment directions differ. That difference may be meaningful. He does not flatten the object into numbers alone, because the numbers require labels and relationships, even when those labels are not recoverable to us. The category is learned through convention and context, not through a modern color legend that applies everywhere. Color almost certainly meant something specific to the people using a given record. Recovering which something, for any particular chord, is a different matter entirely. Chord construction carries information beyond color. Researchers record whether fibers are spun and plied in S or Z directions, whether knots turn one way or the other, and whether pendants attach to the primary chord from the front or back. Across multiple chords, banding and repeated sequences can form higher-level patterns. Not every variable necessarily carried the same weight in every kipu. The specialist reads the familiar combination before him as a working record, not as a puzzle assembled for distant scholars. He checks one attachment, then another, and returns to the group where the traveling and local accounts should meet. Each feature narrows interpretation inside a shared practice, even though its full significance may be lost outside that practice. The direction of a twist, the way a chord is attached, the spacing between groups. All of these are recorded as variables that may carry meaning. The storehouse keeper brings the physical tally spoken earlier, the remaining sacks, folded cloth, and tools set aside for road work. We do not assign invented exact numbers. The point is the comparison. The local kipu represents what is present and already committed. The traveling kipu represents the verified allotment authorized farther east. The oral message identifies the crossing crew and the reason the issue should proceed. 3 forms of evidence now occupy one room: chords from the sender, chords from the receiver, and a count of goods that can be touched. The specialist begins with the lowest decimal positions and works upward. The physical count returns him from abstract structure to sacks, cloth, and tools that must actually leave the room. He works upward from the lowest positions, and the room stays quiet while he does it. The goods are only a few paces away, waiting to agree or disagree. He finds a summation relationship. Several pendant values combine into a total represented elsewhere in the structure. Such internal arithmetic is common enough to be a major focus of current research. A recent computational study of a corpus of 650 quipus found meaningful arrangements of internal sums in at least 74%. That modern aside is brief, and immediately the specialist's hand moves again. He checks whether the subgroup for the bridge workers fits the larger total assigned to road maintenance. It does. The account has not arrived as an isolated number. It sits inside a hierarchy of parts and totals. Arithmetic gives the record an internal check, making some relationships visible, even when their original category names are unknown. Sums of this kind turn up widely across the surviving records, which is one of the few things that can be tested rather than argued. In one large study of several hundred quipus, a clear majority showed internal sums of this kind. That translates no single chord, but it does show the records were doing arithmetic. The specialist next checks the boundary between 2 chord groups. Spacing, color changes, and particular chords may divide categories. Modern researchers have proposed new conventions by comparing large datasets, including the possibility that white pendants sometimes mark boundaries around some groups. These are hypotheses to test, not a key that opens every object. Our composite Kapukama-Yuk does not need a modern statistical model. He works from shared training and local administrative conventions. He separates the relevant group, rests a small weight on the primary chord to keep it still, and repeats the quantity to the storehouse keeper. The proposed boundary remains a research question for modern scholars. while the historical task continues through known local conventions. He does not need the question settled. He needs this account to agree with that one, tonight in this room. Training mattered because a kipu did not explain itself to any passerby. Early colonial accounts describe specialist officials who made and read these records, while indigenous chronicler Felipe Guaman Poma de Ala later drew a kipu kamayuk at work. Such sources are invaluable and limited. They were created after invasion within colonial conditions for particular audiences. They preserve knowledge while also filtering it through upheaval, translation, and individual purpose. The specialist in our room is therefore not reconstructed from one drawing alone. He represents a role supported by objects, archaeology, administrative history, and several kinds of written testimony. His expertise belongs to an institution, but it is carried in a person who must notice, remember, compare, and explain. Specialists were trained for this, and the training was the point. A record anyone could read would have needed to explain itself, and this one never does. Quipus are strongly associated with census information, labor obligations, tribute accounting, inventories, production, and the movement of goods and people. Some colonial accounts attribute histories, songs, or other broader memories to them as well. The safest conclusion is neither that all quipus were ledgers, nor that every quipu was a hidden book of prose. Different objects likely served different functions. The extent and mechanics of non-numerical encoding remain debated. The specialist turns one pendant between finger and thumb, reading a distinction that we cannot honestly translate. Different uses may have shared construction principles without carrying the same kinds of content or being readable by every specialist. Census counts, labor owed, goods stored. These uses are well supported. What else the chords may have carried is a quieter and much less settled question. Colonial descriptions mention uses that went beyond counting. Whether those uses left features we could still recognize in a surviving quipu remains open. Oral context helps close that gap in the living system. The runner's message names the work party and the immediate action. The quipu constrains the count and its place in a larger account. The receiving specialist supplies local knowledge of categories, previous issues, and expected totals. Meaning is distributed across people and objects. Remove the spoken instruction and the purpose may become ambiguous. Remove the quipu and the quantity depends too heavily on memory. Remove the trained reader and the chords remain structured but inaccessible. The Inca system did not fail to invent one familiar technology. It coordinated several technologies around human expertise. The system is therefore neither only oral nor only material. Its reliability lies in the controlled meeting between the two. Neither half was sufficient. The chords held the quantity steady, and a trained voice supplied what the quantities were for. The keeper asks about one chord group that seems to exceed the goods visible in the room. The specialist does not announce an error. He checks the local record's subsidiary chord and learns that part of the total belongs to a neighboring work group whose issue has already been separated. The physical goods are in another chamber. This seam is plausible administrative staging, grounded in documented inventory uses, rather than a translated surviving quipu. Its consequence is useful. A total can be correct while the first room looks short. The structure prevents the comparison from stopping at the nearest pile. By following the subsidiary connection, he restores the larger account and prevents one room from being mistaken for the whole store. A subsidiary cord can hold a portion that was never in this room at all. Reading only what is visible would have produced a confident and incorrect answer. A rare historical case shows how much context can matter. Researchers have matched 6 mid-colonial kippas from the Santa Valley with a surviving written census. That comparison suggests that cord color, grouping, and attachment could distinguish people and categories in ways richer than a bare total. It is an exceptional match from a colonial setting, not a universal decipherment. The specialist before us remains in the pre-contact composite world, where no alphabetic duplicate lies beside his chords. He checks the names carried orally, the relevant color group, and the decimal count together. The agreement is strong enough for the allotment to proceed. One matched archive can reveal possibilities, but it cannot supply missing context for hundreds of unrelated surviving objects. In that one case, the chords and a surviving written list could be set against each other, and the comparison held. Such pairings are rare. The larger corpus keeps the limits visible. Hundreds of surviving Inca-style kippas have been cataloged, and databases record not form. Cord researchers can identify recurring arithmetic and propose relationships among signs. Yet no complete bilingual key survives, and many objects lack secure archaeological context. Some were collected long after their original use. Others were altered, separated, or damaged. The open questions are not an invitation to call the chords mysterious in a theatrical sense. They are a normal condition of historical research: abundant material, partial context, testable patterns, and interpretations that must remain proportional to the evidence. Uncertainty is most useful when it identifies the next comparison to make instead of becoming a performance of unknowability. The comparison offers a glimpse of names entering chord structure while leaving the wider system far from completely translated. Hundreds of kippas survive in collections and catalogs. Most of them arrived without the context that would let anyone say what they were counting. Catalogs record their knots, chords, colors, and structures, which lets objects be compared with one another. Comparison is not the same as reading. The Kippa Kamaya completes his comparison. He places the traveling record above the local one, aligns the relevant groups, and repeats the approved issue to the keeper. She answers with the goods already present and the bundles that must be moved from the second chamber. The figures agree once prior commitments are separated. He does not retie the traveling kippu or invent a new message inside it. Instead, he protects its arrangement, closes the bundle, and prepares a local record for the receiving official. The work has changed what people can do next. The bridge crew's need is no longer a rumor from the road. It is an account checked against another account. The keeper can now move goods with a reasoned authorization, not merely an attractive arrangement of knots. 2 records made in different places, by different hands, for different purposes, have been brought to the same number. That agreement is the authorization. Before the chords are wrapped, the specialist looks once more at the primary line. Its structure is ordinary to him because expertise makes complexity usable. The knots are not magical, and they are not primitive substitutes for real records. They are the record form his administration knows how to produce, carry, compare, and act upon. Modern uncertainty about every sign should not be projected backward as confusion among trained users. At the same time, our respect cannot become false translation. We know the system held numerical administration with great sophistication. We have evidence for broader possibilities. We do not possess every meaning that passed through these hands. Respect for the record means preserving both what is demonstrable and what remains beyond present translation. The chords will outlast the question. They have already outlasted the people who could have answered it without effort. He gives the closed traveling kipu to a fresh runner and the local comparison to the receiving specialist's assistant. The oral instruction is repeated once, then returned for correction. No correction is needed. The bundle leaves the room with its categories reconciled and its purpose intact. The storehouse keeper walks toward the second chamber to prepare the goods. The kipu kamayu gathers the loose working cords and leaves the table clear. His practical task is finished. Farther along the road, an official is waiting not for a marvel, but for an answer. May the counted allotment now be released to the people keeping the crossing open. The fresh runner receives a verified task, while the specialist's table returns to the quiet order needed for the next account. The table is cleared slowly. Nothing about the next account will be easier for having rushed the end of this one. Late afternoon reaches the receiving storehouse before the runner does. An official sits with the keeper near the doorway, where the remaining light is strong enough to see cord color and not position. Our final adult is another composite, a receiving specialist whose task is to decide whether the requested issue can be made cleanly. The original message has crossed several relays, a maintained road and a bridge. It now approaches the place where words and records must change into action. The keeper has arranged the local kipu, the physical goods, and the list of prior commitments in the form her training recognizes. Nothing is released merely because someone has run a long way. The fading light creates a deadline only for careful seeing, not for spectacle, and the workers bring the records closer to the doorway. There is enough light for perhaps another hour of exact work. Everyone in the room has arranged the evening around that limit rather than against it. A shell note sounds beyond the outer wall. The assistant rises and clears the entrance. The runner arrives at a controlled pace, breathing hard but able to speak. He places the small package down, then offers the wrapped traveling kipu. The official waits until both are secure. Only then does the runner deliver the oral report. The Eastern account has been checked. The allotment belongs to the crossing work party, and the receiving storehouse is to release the measured goods if the local comparison agrees. The sentence has survived because each runner treated repetition as part of the delivery, not as an optional courtesy. The handoff repeats the same sequence used at earlier stations, making consistency visible at the point where the chain ends. The same three things arrive in the same order they left: the package, the record, and the words. Nothing about the final station is treated as special. The official asks the runner to repeat the place and the intended group. The words agree with the local report sent from the bridge. He does not ask the messenger to interpret the kipu. Chaskis carried records. Kipu kamayuks and other trained officials handled their reading. Roles could vary in practice, and the surviving evidence does not permit a rigid job chart for every province. In this room, the division is clear enough. The runner knows the route and the message. The specialist knows the chords. The keeper knows the stores. Precision comes from bringing those forms of knowledge together without asking one person to pretend expertise in all three. Each person contributes a different check, so disagreement can be located rather than hidden inside one person's authority. If the three checks agree, the goods move. If they do not, the disagreement itself shows where to look, which is more useful than a single confident opinion. The runner speaks, the specialist reads, and the keeper counts. None of the three is asked to vouch for the other two. The traveling bundle is opened on the cloth. Its primary cord lies above the receiving record. The official begins at the recognized end and locates the group identified by the oral message. He checks not positions, then the relation of the subgroup to its total. The local specialist has already done the same comparison farther east, but repetition here is not waste. A relay moves trust forward by creating points where evidence can be checked again. The keeper names the goods prepared in the second chamber. The official matches each category to the appropriate cord group and leaves uncertain features untouched. The chords lie still while human attention moves between structure, speech, and the goods awaiting a decision. He leaves untouched anything he cannot interpret with confidence. An uncertain feature is not an obstacle here, only a part of the record that today's task does not require. The decimal structure makes the quantities legible to trained eyes. Knots nearer one position represent units, those in another tens, then hundreds and higher places as needed. The official does not recite the entire system. He reads the values relevant to the issue, compares the sum, and asks the keeper for the physical count. She leads him to the storage chamber. Rows of sacks and folded bundles stand away from the wall where air can move. Kolkis and storerooms were designed in varied forms to preserve supplies suited to local conditions. Here their purpose narrows to what can be issued before evening. The keeper opens only the relevant storage space, keeping unrelated commitments outside the count now being tested. Other stores in the same building belong to other decisions. Bringing them into view would only make tonight's count harder to trust. Two workers begin the count. One touches each sack in the assigned row, while the other moves a small marker from one hand to the other. The official watches the sequence and compares it with the spoken total. No exact number is supplied to our reconstruction because no surviving dispatch gives one. What matters is the method of resolution. The account on the cords, the oral instruction, and the goods in the room must agree closely enough that the release does not steal from another commitment or leave the crossing crew short. The last sack in the row appears to make the physical total 1 unit low. Markers and spoken totals give the count a second rhythm, reducing the chance that a touch will be skipped or repeated. One of them touches each item, and the other says the running number aloud. Two people counting in two ways is slower and much harder to fool. The row is worked from one end without skipping, and a marker moves with them. Counting is the least interesting part of the evening, and the part most worth doing properly. The keeper does not immediately blame the record or the runner. She checks the adjoining chamber, where part of the same category was set aside for an earlier issue. One bundle has been placed behind a stack of folded cloth to keep the passage clear. It belongs to the bridge allotment and has not yet left the storehouse. The apparent shortage comes from arrangement, not arithmetic. She brings it into the counted row. The official repeats the total. The local record and traveling kipu now agree with the physical goods. A discrepancy has produced a search rather than a spectacle, and the result is an ordinary bundle returned to its proper group. The recovered bundle closes the gap without forcing anyone to revise a sound record, merely to match an incomplete first view. The record was right, and the first count was incomplete, which is the ordinary shape of most shortages. Looking again costs less than correcting a document that was never wrong. The oral message supplies the final relationship. These goods are not a general reserve to be moved west at someone's convenience. They are tied to a work party maintaining a specific crossing and approach. The official asks when the next crew is expected. The runner carries the answer from the previous station's report. The keeper confirms that pack animals and attendants can be assigned in the morning. This part of the scene is plausible, grounded in the documented movement of state supplies and labor along the road. It is not a preserved transcript. The decision rests on evidence that has converged from several directions. Purpose turns quantity into an instruction, linking the counted goods to the adults whose work depends on their release. The bridge crew is a day's travel away and has already done the work these goods are meant to answer. The number alone would not have said so. The official authorizes the issue according to the practices of this reconstructed center. The Kipakamayuk prepares a local court record of the release rather than altering the traveling object for dramatic effect. The keeper separates the goods and places them near the departure area. Each action reduces the chance that tomorrow's count will repeat today's confusion. Administration is not the moment a knot becomes an order by itself. It is the sequence in which trained people connect a record to a named purpose, verify available resources, and make responsibility visible to the next person. The new local record preserves the consequence of the decision for the next count and the next responsible reader. A decision that leaves no trace would have to be made again from the beginning. This one is set into chord before anyone leaves the room. The runner drinks and sits near the wall while the specialists finish. His stage is over. He does not know every knot in the bundle, but he can hear the consequence of the message he carried. The keeper naming the morning departure, the workers shifting sacks, the official repeating the destination. The relay has converted distance into coordination. No one runner crossed the whole route. No single cord spoke unaided. No official acted on memory alone. The message arrived because road, station, bridge, voice, object, and trained interpretation met in the right order. His recovery is part of the relay design, which assigns fatigue to a person for one stage rather than to the whole message. He has done what his stage required and is finished. The message went on without him some hours ago and is no longer his to carry. The traveling kipu is wrapped again and set with the official records. Its future handling is left within the administrative chain rather than invented here. The local kipu of the issue remains beside the keeper. Surviving collections show that kipus could be compact, complex, repaired, rearranged, and carried, but their individual biographies are often incomplete. Our composite object has served one bounded narrative purpose. It constrained account while oral words identified an immediate action. That is enough to answer the title without claiming a full translation. The rest of its encoded distinctions remain with the people trained to use them. Wrapped again, the object returns from active comparison to protected custody, still meaningful within the institution that produced it. The authorization remains conditional on the verified goods, keeping administrative confidence tied to what the keeper and specialist can actually count. Nothing has been approved in the abstract. Every quantity released tonight corresponds to something a person put a hand on in this building. The wrapped bundle will travel again or stay, depending on what is needed next. Either way, it leaves this room in the condition it arrived, minus nothing. Outside, the road workers assigned to the storehouse tie the prepared goods into stable loads. They check weight and balance rather than rushing into the dimming light. The issue will leave in the morning when the crossing party can receive it safely. A fast communication network did not require every physical response to travel at running speed. The message moved quickly so that the right goods could be organized before the next day's labor. Timing is therefore not one number. It is the fit between information, preparation, and the practical moment when action can begin. Preparation begins now so that morning movement can be calm, balanced, and attached to a confirmed destination. Loads tied in the evening travel better than loads tied in a hurry at dawn. The work is quiet and the knots are checked twice. A final runner carries a brief confirmation back toward the preceding station. He takes no new unresolved problem with him. The confirmation states that the records agree and the allotment is prepared. Whether every Inca center used such a return notice is not known, so this is plausible closure rather than a universal procedure. Its role is human. The people at the crossing need not wonder whether their request disappeared into the road. The runner leaves with a lighter bundle, and the official watches until he reaches the first bend. The network closes one loop while remaining ready for the next. The returning runner carries resolution rather than suspense, allowing the earlier station to close its own open task. Somewhere behind him, the station keeper has been holding a small unfinished thing in mind. It will be finished before he sleeps. The keeper shuts the inner storage door and leaves the prepared row accessible for morning. The official returns the cords to their wraps. The assistant sweeps grit from the threshold where several hurried feet have passed. Each person completes the small action that belongs to the end of work. The original task is resolved. A message was received cleanly, carried by relay, checked against Kipu records and actual stores, and turned into a measured issue for the workers keeping passage possible. The answer has arrived without an alphabetic page, but never without recording, memory, infrastructure, or disciplined human attention. Every promise made by the original dispatch now has a visible payoff in the room and along the road. The row is left where morning hands can reach it without moving anything else. Tomorrow's first task has been made simple by tonight's last one. Evening settles over the station. The bridge farther east remains open. The Chasqui oasis along the route return to waiting. A primary cord rests inside its wrapping, and the prepared loads stand in a quiet row. The official has no need to make the result grander than it is. Tomorrow, workers will carry the issue toward the crossing. Another message may come from another direction. The system continues through repeated ordinary goals, each completed well enough to release the next. A small hearth near the outer room gives the workers a place to warm their hands as the last light leaves the road. The hearth's lower light joins the established images without asking the completed message to begin another story. The room grows warmer near the fire and cooler near the door, and nobody moves to correct either. One runner remains by the doorway for the first part of the evening watch. He hears no trumpet. The road beyond the wall is a pale line between darker slopes. Behind him, the cords are secure, the packages are counted, and the morning loads are ready. He places one hand on the station post, then lets it fall. Arrival has become stillness, not because the network has vanished, But because this message no longer needs movement, the bridge, storehouse, specialist, and relay have each answered it. The human chain can rest at this link, while the small hearth settles into a lower glow. Attention releases its final task in the same place where the bundle, the spoken report, and the road have come to rest. The prepared row and the quiet records now answer the promise carried from the first station without introducing another demand. He watches the road for a while because someone always does, not because anything is expected. The night is settled and the work is behind it. The road remains where the last runner left it, rising in stone steps and easing across the slope. No message moves along it now. The worn surface holds only the memory of measured feet, one stage following another. A low station wall stands beside the path. Its doorway is open to the evening air. The hand that received the cord is empty again, resting without a package to secure or a sentence to repeat. Farther down, the next bend hides the bridge, but its lines have already held and its work is done. The empty path needs no explanation, only the familiar line of stone settling into shadow. Inside the station, a wrapped cord rests on the cloth. Primary line, hanging strands and knots are hidden together in the shape the runners carried. No one pulls them open. A hand passes near the bundle, checks that it lies safely, and withdraws. The room contains no new count and no waiting decision. The message has reached its place. The cord can remain still, its fibers no longer moving with a runner's breath. Beyond the doorway, the road grows softer in the fading light. Nothing is added to the bundle. It is simply held by the quiet room. At the crossing, the grass cables curve between stone anchors. The walkway gives a little to the evening wind and then returns. Hands that tightened the bindings have gathered their tools. The cleared step, the open drain, and the steady handrail remain in their proper places. No foot approaches from either side. The bridge is simply ready, joining one bank to the other without asking to be noticed. Above it, the relay station rests beside the road. The crossing remains ready, with no traveler asking it to move beneath a new weight. The prepared bundles wait. A hand has set the last one straight. The local cord record is wrapped. The traveling record is secure, and the threshold has been cleared. Arrival has become an arrangement of ordinary things: road, station, cord, package, bridge, and hands no longer hurried. The last runner sits where the wall keeps off the wind. He does not rehearse the message again. There is nothing left in it to carry. The arrangement no longer points forward, because every carried part has reached its place. The small hearth lowers beside the outer room. Beyond it, the road is still. The cord rests. The bridge holds its quiet curve, and the station doorway remains open to the darkened path. One empty hand lies against the warm stone, then settles. The message has arrived. The last coal keeps a dim red point for a little while longer, with no words following it. Road, cord, hand, station, bridge, and arrival remain together as the red point lowers.